The lantern in the fog. The village of Greylane was not much more than a cluster of stone cottages tucked between rolling hills and marshland. Travelers rarely came upon it unless by mistake, for the roads that led there wound in circles and were often swallowed by mist. The people who lived in Greylane were quiet folk, shepherds, woodcutters, and farmers who worked the stubborn earth and whispered more to the wind than to strangers. On maps, the place barely appeared. But in stories, it was never forgotten. For Greylane carried a legend. A tale that clung to the fog like the dampness on a traveler's cloak. They called it the Lantern Ghost. Chapter 1. The Old Legend. The village of Greylane was not much more than a cluster of stone cottages tucked between rolling hills and marshland. Travelers rarely came upon it unless by mistake, for the roads that led there wound in circles and were often swallowed by mist. The people who lived in Greylane were quiet folk, shepherds, woodcutters, and farmers who worked the stubborn earth and whispered more to the wind than to strangers. On maps, the place barely appeared. But in stories, it was never forgotten. For Greylane carried a legend. A tale that clung to the fog like the dampness on a traveler's cloak. They called it the Lantern Ghost. The story was told in hushed tones by the fire, usually in winter when the nights were long and the river froze thick. Children gathered close as the elders leaned forward, voices low and heavy. Once, they would say, there was a man named Elias, the night watchman of Greylane. Long before we had a church bell or a town crier, it was Elias who walked the paths after dark, lantern in hand, guiding strangers safely through the marsh and keeping watch for wolves. He was a gentle man, they said, who never turned away a weary traveler. His lantern was the first thing people saw when they approached Greylane at night, a beacon in the fog. But one bitter winter, the snow fell without pause, and food grew scarce. The marsh froze into jagged shards, and hunger gnawed at the village. Elias vanished. Some claimed he'd gone out to search for food and never returned. Others believed the marsh had swallowed him whole. His lantern was never found. Weeks later, on a night when the fog was thick enough to blind the moon, villagers swore they saw a glow moving through the fields. A lantern's glow. Swinging gently, without sound, without a bearer. From that night on, Elias was no longer a man. He was a whisper in the fog. Some claimed his ghost appeared to lead lost travelers back to safety. Others warned that if you followed the light when your heart was impure, you would vanish, your footprints ending in the snow, with nothing left but silence. And so, the people of Greylane learned a custom. On nights when the fog pressed close and thick, each house left a candle burning in its window. Not to drive the spirit away, but to thank it. To remind Elias that his village still remembered him, and that he was welcome to rest. Chapter 2. The Fog Returns. Generations passed, yet the story remained. Some believed it, some didn't. But no one dared test it. One autumn, when the harvest was poor and the hills were already rimmed with frost, the fog rolled into Greylane thicker than it had in years. Whole cottages disappeared from view. The sound of sheep bells muffled to nothing. Among the villagers was a boy named Tomlin, no older than 12. His father was a shepherd, his mother a weaver. Tomlin was curious in ways that made the elders frown, always asking questions about the old stories, always sneaking to the marsh despite being told to stay away. On one such fog-heavy evening, Tomlin lingered near the edge of the fields when he saw it. A faint light, swaying between the reeds. At first, he thought it was just another villager with a torch. But no footsteps followed. No figure appeared. Only the glow, bobbing gently, as if carried by an invisible hand. His heart quickened. Elias, he whispered. He wanted to follow. Every part of him longed to know the truth. But his grandmother's warnings echoed in his head, never chase the lantern. Let it pass, and leave a candle instead. So Tomlin ran home, breath sharp in his chest, and lit a stub of wax on the windowsill. That night, he dreamed of footsteps crunching snow outside his door, and the glow of a lantern fading into the mist. Chapter 3. Whispers in the Village. Word spread quickly. Some villagers muttered that the lantern ghost had returned. Others laughed it off. But as the days grew shorter, more people claimed to glimpse the glow. A woodcutter saw it near the edge of the forest. A milkmaid swore she followed it halfway to the river before it vanished. And one shepherd, older than the rest, refused to leave his cottage after nightfall, muttering that Elias's spirit was restless again. The fog thickened each evening, smothering the hills in silence. Doors were bolted early. Candles burned in every window. But Tomlin could not forget what he'd seen. He wanted proof, not just a story, not just a whisper. Proof that the ghost was real. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel so you won't miss more eerie and fascinating tales. Chapter 4: A Night of Courage. One night, when the fog pressed so thick you could taste it on your tongue, Tomlin crept outside. He carried only a small lantern of his own and a pocket knife he had no idea how to use. The village was silent, save for the occasional creak of timber and the distant cry of a night bird. Then, there it was. A glow, brighter than his lantern, moving steadily toward the marsh. He followed. His feet pressed into the wet earth, leaving soft prints. The fog curled around him, and every sound seemed swallowed whole. The light swayed ahead, steady, patient, never too far, never too near. "Elias," Tomlin whispered again, voice trembling. "Show yourself." The light paused. Just for a breath. As though it had heard. Then it moved on. Tomlin's chest tightened, but he followed still. Deeper into the marsh they went, where the air smelled of earth and the ground was soft and treacherous. His lantern sputtered, and shadows leapt across the fog. The ghostly light never wavered. At last, it stopped near the twisted stump of a long-dead tree. The glow hung there, swaying, casting pale beams through the mist. Tomlin's hand shook. He raised his lantern, squinting into the whiteness. And for the briefest heartbeat, he saw him. A figure in a tattered cloak. A man's outline. Hollow eyes that glimmered like distant stars. In one pale hand, an iron lantern, burning with no flame. Tomlin gasped. The figure lifted its head, as though studying him. Then the lantern swung once, twice, and the light dimmed into nothing. The marsh fell black and silent. Chapter 5: The Aftermath. Tomlin stumbled home, heart hammering so hard he could barely breathe. When he burst into the cottage, his parents scolded him for being outside, but when they saw his face, ashen, eyes wide with terror, they said no more. By morning, the boy could not explain what he had seen. Some villagers believed him, others laughed. But all agreed, the lantern ghost had returned, and Elias was watching once more. The candles burned brighter that winter. No one dared walk the marsh after dark. And Tomlin, though he tried to be brave, never again followed the lantern. He had looked into the fog and seen the truth, and he knew the line between safety and vanishing was thinner than mist. Chapter 6: The Lantern's Purpose. Years later, as Tomlin grew into a man, the sightings continued. Some travelers swore the light saved them, guiding them to the village when the fog threatened to consume them. Others told darker tales, that they followed the glow, only for their companions to vanish. Greylane never found proof, only stories. But one truth remained: whenever the fog rolled heavy and the hills disappeared, a light would wander the marshes. A lantern, swinging gently, waiting for those who dared to follow. And so, to this very night, Greylane keeps its custom. Candles in the windows. Silence in the streets. And never, ever chasing the light. For whether Elias's ghost is a guardian or a warning, no one knows. Chapter 7: The Stranger in Greylane. Not all who entered Greylane knew its story. One spring, when the mist still clung to the hills, a traveler arrived, a scholar from the city, with ink-stained hands and a curiosity that made the villagers uneasy. He had heard whispers of the lantern ghost in taverns and wanted proof, something to write about in his journals. The villagers warned him. Do not follow the light. Do not mock Elias. Light a candle, and leave him be. But the scholar only laughed. Ghosts are tales for children, he said, and mist is nothing but weather. That very night, he ventured into the marsh. He carried no candle for respect, only a notebook, a quill, and a bright torch. He was never seen again. At dawn, the villagers found his torch half buried in mud near the river's edge. His notebook lay open, its ink blurred by damp. The last line, barely legible, read, "The lantern is real." After that, no outsider doubted the villagers' warnings. Chapter 8: The Winter of Silence. There was one year when the fog did not lift for weeks. The sun itself seemed swallowed, and Greylane lived in a twilight world. Sheep were lost in the fields. Wagons overturned on the hidden paths. The villagers barely left their homes. And every night, without fail, the light was there, moving between cottages, pausing near doorways, wandering the marsh. The people grew uneasy. They whispered that Elias was restless, perhaps angered, perhaps lonely. Children were kept from the windows. Men refused to hunt. Women crossed themselves when they heard footsteps on the frost outside. But no harm came, only the endless glow, always just beyond reach. When at last the fog lifted, and the hills returned to view, the people found something strange. At the heart of the marsh, where the light was most often seen, wildflowers bloomed out of season. White blossoms, glimmering like pale stars in the mud. The villagers took it as a sign. Elias was not vengeful. Only waiting. Chapter 9, Tomlin's Return. Years passed, and Tomlin, now grown into a man with children of his own, remained haunted by the night he had seen Elias. He told the tale often, but he never again braved the fog. Until one night, when his youngest daughter wandered from the cottage. The mist had fallen thick. Her small footprints led toward the marsh. Panic seized Tomlin. He ran, calling her name, lantern shaking in his hand. And then he saw it. Not her, but the glow. The lantern ghost, swaying ahead. His breath caught, terror and gratitude tangling in his chest. He followed. Through the reeds, past the dead tree, until at last, there she was. His daughter, standing unharmed in the mist, her eyes wide but calm. The ghost's lantern glowed just beyond her, casting a soft light that seemed to shield her from the darkness. Tomlin rushed forward, scooped her into his arms, and turned to look once more. But the light was gone. That night, he wept, not from fear, but from understanding. Elias had guided his family to safety, as he had done for countless others. Chapter 10, The Last Candle. Time moves strangely in Greylane. Seasons pass, faces change, but the fog remains. Some say the lantern ghost still walks the marsh, though fewer see it now. Perhaps Elias has grown tired. Perhaps he has finally found peace. But the villagers keep their custom. Candles in every window. Doors locked at night. Silence when the mist grows thick. For even if the lantern no longer appears, the memory of it lingers. And no one dares be the one to end the tradition. In the oldest cottage of Greylane, an elder keeps the final candle burning, a flame that has never been allowed to die. Children visit to watch it flicker, to hear the story once more, and to wonder if one day they, too, will glimpse the glow in the fog. And so the legend endures. Not as fear. Not as superstition. But as a reminder that sometimes the lost do not vanish. Sometimes they remain, guiding, waiting, watching, until the village itself forgets to look. When the mist grows thick, and the world falls quiet, remember Greylane. And if you see a lantern's glow swaying in the distance, do not follow. Do not run. Simply bow your head, light your candle, and whisper a single word. Thank you.